Hello and welcome to TFNFinancialNews.com. I'm J. Christoph Amberger and we're here to celebrate ethnic diversity. Late spring and summer weekends, especially the long variety, have been designed to bring you back to your roots. Immigrant roots, that is. Every desk jockey is out at the crack of dawn, mowing his lawn wearing decade-old t-shirts and shorts. Sullen suburban teenagers are forced to skim pools. Stately executives fill 45-gallon bags with weeds and yard debris pulled out, scooting about on their knees under the scorching sun, or take a machete to brambles and a mulberry tree sapling so Mem Sahib can plant snapdragons and dogwood trees. Meals of subpar meat scraps and agricultural byproducts are prepared on open fires. Heck, just last week I was forced to ford a river on the back of a pickup truck on my way to scout camp, much like millions of immigrants before me. Accordingly, bean counters could estimate that every summer weekend in the United States costs Central and South American economies billions as middle-class America is taking menial jobs away from immigrants. Of course, they're immigrants and then they're immigrants. They're those who, like yours truly, have dutifully jumped through all the bureaucratic hoops and have their paperwork in order, and then there are those who haven't. The United States is a nation governed by law, which is made by the descendants of those whose immigration papers were squeaky clean. Which is why they like to use the word amnesty a lot in the context of the recently proposed immigration law changes and talk about rewarding lawbreakers with citizenship. Right now, there are between 10 and 12 million lawbreakers living and working in the United States. They mow lawns, skim pools, fill garbage bags with weeds, flip burgers, clean homes, swab floors, build homes, and pick fruit. In fact, there seem to be so many of them that we can face a significant downturn in one of the largest and most important economic sectors, such as the home building industry, and actually see the unemployment rate declining. Like any other commodity, cheap immigrant labor is subject to the laws of supply and demand. Over the past 2 years, the government has tried to crack down on what they consider the source of demand, American businesses that hire illegal aliens. Forcing employers to pay the full cost of their worker, the argument goes, will kill the demand side of the equation. Accordingly, in our daily newspapers, we're reading about 300 illegal Walmart greeters being busted, a dozen Chinese being found in the kitchen of a favorite Japanese restaurant, a truckload of Salvadorians being recovered in the desert heat. Despite arrests and deportations, however, the demand for immigrant labor seems to continue unabated. Because in the larger scheme, it is not American business who demands cheap labor, it is the American consumer, especially those who like to buy products made with pride in the United States of America. Unless those Americans develop a taste for expensive and non-competitive domestic products and produce, that demand side will continue. Which leaves the supply side. What few pundits have pointed out is that the still deplorable state of the Mexican and other Central and South American economies has resulted in a revival of a time-honored communist-era economic strategy that economist Stephen Hanke says was lifted straight from Marshal Tito's Yugoslav playbook. Back under communism, Yugoslavia was unable to fully employ its labor force. Tito came up with a simple strategy. He opened up the borders to export surplus labor. It worked like a charm. By the early 1970s, about 11% of the entire Yugoslav labor force was working in Western Europe. The hard currency remittances they sent back home soon made up about 30% of Yugoslavia's total exports. Rather than modernize Mexico's dysfunctional labor market, the Mexican government has embarked on an aggressive course of exporting surplus labor. It serves two purposes. They trade humans for the money they send back and at the same time reduce domestic problems associated with high unemployment. Over 27% of Mexico's labor force now is working in the United States, sending home $20 billion in annual remittances. That amounts to 1/3 of the total wage earnings in the formal sector of the Mexican economy and a whopping 10% of Mexico's exports. If you think that's going to change, I have bad news for you. Other parts of South America, Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and of course Venezuela, are again aggressively pursuing outdated communist labor policies. There is no end to supply and no end to demand for cheap labor in the United States. So far, however, the US has been coming out ahead. Since the 1980s, the US economy has vastly outperformed its industrial trading partners in Europe and Japan. The Dow Jones is setting new highs almost daily. US employment stands at a record 150 million, not counting the tens of millions of illegals. Household wealth is $56 trillion. Using cheap labor, US manufacturers produced $1.5 trillion worth of goods in 2005, up 70% from the $900 billion in 1992. As Larry Kudlow recently pointed out, manufacturing now accounts for a higher share of the US economy than it did 15 years ago. And the United States is the only industrialized country whose population, thanks in part to immigration, keeps growing. The way I see it, immigration has a double benefit for the American economy. It keeps labor costs low and productivity high, and it keeps a competitive attitude and ambition alive that is sorely lacking in other Western countries. After all, immigrants don't just have to prove their worth in the country they move to. If my own experience is any guide, a main motivator is to show to those who remain behind and typically predicted disgraceful defeat that you can survive and prosper in your chosen country. When Ronald Reagan signed an immigration reform that gave amnesty to an estimated 2.7 million illegal immigrants in the 1980s, he said, "Future generations of Americans will be thankful for our efforts to humanely regain control of our borders and thereby preserve the value of one of the most sacred possessions of our people, American citizenship." I believe this is an excellent sentiment to keep in mind as we enter the hot air phase of the presidential campaign. For TFNFinancialNews.com, I'm J. Christoph Amberger, wishing you an ambitious week.